Next, a special edition of KQED Newsroom making a bet on rehabilitation for prisoners serving life sentences.
I committed first-degree murder back in 1982.
California has some 26,000 lifers behind bars. Now more, many more, are being paroled due to changes in the criminal justice system. Do they pose a risk to public safety?
In my humble opinion, some of these parolees are ticking time bombs.
Will rehabilitation work?
There's a strong public safety interest in making sure they're prepared when they do get released.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We devote tonight's program to examining profound changes underway in California's criminal justice system that affect prisoners serving life sentences. 15 years to life, 25 years to life, mostly for murder. Now, under Governor Jerry Brown's administration, a record number of so-called lifers are being granted parole. The governor's office says this has nothing to do with the need to reduce prison overcrowding. Instead, they insist the trend is driven mostly by court rulings that make it harder to deny parole. Scott Schaefer takes a look at a new program aimed at addressing the growing number of lifers getting out.
Hundreds of inmates here at Solano Prison in Vacaville are hoping for a second chance, parole. And California officials think the key is rehabilitation.
Hurt people.
These prisoners are doing sentences like 25 years to life, some for the most heinous crimes imaginable.
The hurt that we carry, we take it out on somebody else.
They don't know if they'll ever get out. Still, they're trying to understand what went wrong and how they ended up here.
I seen you hand up, Mr. Glass.
You know, one of my biggest fears in the past was rejection, right? And communication skills were lacking, to say the least, because of my alcohol and drug abuse.
In my family, a lot of it always went back to, quit complaining. I'll give you something to cry about.
Some of these inmates are trained to work as mentors to fellow offenders. Take Jose Hernandez.
We can't do nothing to change the past of what we did because it's written in permanent ink. But we do have a choice today. We have the tools now that we didn't have 20 or 25 years ago.
In 1993, Hernandez strangled his ex-girlfriend to death. Last year, the parole board found him suitable for release, but Governor Brown reversed it, saying he thought Hernandez was too high a risk to public safety.
I'm going to go back to the board, and I'm going to go back to the psychologist and be as best as a person as I can be every single day.
Programs like these are part of a major shift that Jerry Brown has brought to criminal justice. For the first time in decades, rehabilitation for long-term inmates is a funding priority. Some classes are being aimed directly at lifers, from anger management to how to reconcile with their own family members if they're released.
The situation.
Instructor LaWanda Green is working with these inmates on developing empathy for their victim.
Probably I'm at a point where I don't care anymore, right? Because somebody caused me to be a victim. The toughest part is when you have the person who believes they were valid in doing their crime, the gang-related crime where they believe it was either me or them. I had no other way to make another decision.
Today is graduation for one group of lifers who've completed a series of classes.
I'm really grateful to be here. I've never done this before.
The special guest is not a typical graduation speaker. 6 years ago, Teresa Cordemanch lost her son Matt, a Fairfield City councilman who was shot and killed at age 22, a victim of mistaken identity. She remembers the night she got the call.
It was my friend Terry, and she said, "I think Matt got shot." I'm like, what? And she goes, "Yeah, Teresa, I think he got shot." And I said, "Okay, let me go. Let me call his phone." And I kept calling his phone and he didn't answer.
This is one way that inmates hear about the impact crime has on their victims and families. James Ward responds passionately.
I could do 1,000 years in prison, 10,000 years in prison, and it will never match what you have gone through. So, when you think about unfairness, my fellow murderers, think about her. And that is real unfairness. Can I say that I have been treated unfairly because the governor pulls my date?
Ward has spent half his life in prison for killing his ex-girlfriend over 30 years ago. He's now 64. After being turned down 5 times, he was recently found suitable for parole and will be released November 5th, unless Governor Brown blocks it.
Pleased I want to get out of prison, but I understand the cost that symbolizes.
Ward says the classes inside prison have helped him understand the pain he's caused others.
I have the opportunity to get found suitable and get out and pick up the pieces of my life. They don't have any place where they can go appeal and say, bring my loved one back. They don't have that. So that's, I think about that.
Mr. Sternberg.
In past decades, only a trickle of lifers got out. Parole boards were conservative, and past governors reversed up to 95% of parole recommendations. But a 2008 state Supreme Court ruling made it harder to deny parole on the basis of the crime itself. Since then, nearly 2,300 lifers have gotten out. Deputy Director for Rehabilitation Roger Meyer says it's now a priority to help these offenders prepare for life on the outside.
Some of these inmates, when they came to prison, there were no cell phones. They've never used an ATM before. For 20-some years, they've been told what to eat, what to wear, when to get up, when to report. It would be remiss if we didn't try to ensure that they are successful when they do go out to society.
These programs promote personal growth for the inmates and help show they're suitable for parole. Rehabilitation also reduces the chance that offenders will commit new crimes, says Cynthia Flores DeLion, who heads the Office of Victim Rights and Services.
It's an opportunity for them to now internalize and say, okay, how can I make my life better so that I can get out and be successful and not re-victimize?
In fact, statistics show that lifers who get out are among the least likely to commit another felony, says UC Berkeley criminologist Barry Crisberg.
Now, part of that is because they stay such a long time, and when they get out, they're pretty old. I mean, the single thing we know from criminology is that getting older reduces your probability of committing crime. If you combine that with programs preparing people for release, you can make those rates even better.
I'm thankful that I have that I can share with them.
For Bridget Fitting Nevin, statistics are no reassurance. Her father, Timothy Fitting, was killed in 1990 by an employee who struck him in the head with a wrench 24 times.
If you cross that line, that you're capable of crossing that line in the future. There was always this comfort that I had, knowing that this person was in jail and that, I was protected from that. This is put together by our family.
In June, her father's killer was found suitable for parole. Nevin worries that the programs inside prison are coaching offenders on what to say to the parole board.
Our community, I feel, at large, is put into a vulnerable situation. It's, in my humble opinion, some of these parolees are ticking time bombs. We're basing all our comfort on statistic probability that now these individuals aren't capable of committing crimes, just based on their age.
Nevin will urge the governor to reverse parole for her father's killer. For lifers who are found suitable for parole, freedom brings new challenges. Here in downtown Berkeley, the nonprofit Options Recovery Services offers ex-offenders a place to land when they get out. Tom Gorham is program director.
When we started Options Recovery Services, we didn't have housing. We didn't have a mental health clinic. And this program is built on what the clients show us that they need. And one thing they needed was a safe place to stay.
2 years ago, that's what David Hillary was looking for. He had been granted parole after serving 18 years on a life sentence for second-degree murder.
What do I do? It's like, I've been gone for 18 years. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have insurance. I'm on parole. I don't have a doctor. Finding these little nuances of what being a responsible man was, learning that is a tall task.
While behind bars, Hillary obtained certification to work as a substance abuse counselor through a program run by Options. After his release, Options gave Hillary a room in transitional housing and put him to work, teaching classes for recovering addicts at Options.
So, two things in life that show up quite frequently: triggers and warning signs. What is the difference?
For some reason, me and my boyfriend.
But my amends is living different, because I don't necessarily believe I have the right to a second chance. I believe that if you see my actions are indicative of a different person, have some compassion.
California still has some 26,000 lifers in prison, more than any other state. Criminologist Barry Crisberg says there's no one-size-fits-all solution to crime and punishment.
The issue is not punishment. We're going to punish these people. The question is, what's enough? You know, is 20 years enough? Is 25 years enough? Is 35 years enough?
As policymakers grapple with that question, the state hopes to expand programs to help more lifers win freedom.
As we just heard, lifers must demonstrate that they won't be a risk to public safety if they get out of prison. The governor has veto power, but the decisions are made by the Board of Parole hearings. Earlier, I spoke with the board's executive officer, Jennifer Schaefer. Jennifer Schaefer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You look at thousands of cases every year. What do you look for when deciding whether to release an inmate?
Well, our first consideration is, of course, public safety and whether the person currently poses a risk of public safety. But we look at a variety of factors. We're actually required by law to look at all reliable and relevant information. So that means we look at the crime, we take input from the prosecutor, we take input from the victim and law enforcement agencies, we read through all the crime reports, we read through any appellate decisions, and then we look at all of their record while they've been incarcerated.
And what are you looking for when you interview the inmates? How do you know that they're being sincere as opposed to perhaps saying the things that they think the parole board wants to hear?
Well, a lot of it has to do with looking at the records. We do a tremendous amount of preparation. Our commissioners have an entire day. Every Monday is what we call our dark days, where they prepare for those hearings, reviewing those files so that when they go in, they have a really good idea of the facts surrounding that particular inmate. So then they engage in a conversation with the inmate. And really what they're looking for is, who were you at the time of the crime and who are you today?
Why is there such a big increase in the number of lifers being released?
Well, it's interesting. For the last 2 calendar years, our grant rate has been stable. It's been at about 14% of scheduled hearings. I think what a lot of people are seeing is the effects of a 2008 California State Supreme Court decision, wherein the state Supreme Court came out and basically said it's not enough that you find that the crime or static factors pose a risk of of dangerousness. You have to show that the person today is currently dangerous. And the way they explained it, which I think makes the most sense, is they explained that inmates who are sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, they have to have an opportunity for parole. So if the board could deny somebody parole based on the static factors of their crime alone, then they really don't have a possibility for parole. So there has to be something a little bit more. And that's what the Supreme Court said in 2008. And since then, we've been working very hard to train our commissioners on the law and apply that law to the facts of each case. And
even with that training, though, as you know, parole decisions are part science, part psychology test, part subjective judgment. Given the numbers being released, isn't it just a matter of time before another horrible crime might happen?
Well, we certainly hope not. To date, we have a very, very low recidivism rate for lifers who get through the parole suitability hearing process. It's less than 1% have a new conviction. And that's pretty significant. It's something that we're very proud of. We certainly hope nobody will ever be hurt as a result of an offender that we have found suitable.
Governor Brown has a really different approach on this. He's affirmed 82% of parole board decisions, whereas previous governors mostly reversed the decisions. Gray Davis, for example, really only affirmed 2. How much does his philosophy factor into your decisions?
He certainly doesn't interact directly with our commissioners, but I certainly have the same kinds of philosophy as the governor, which is adherence to the law. And one of our main goals is to produce decisions that won't be overturned on appeal, and we've been very successful in that. So, I don't really want to comment on prior governors, but their decisions to reverse our grants were then reversed by the courts. So it's not as if those lifers didn't get out. They got out as a result of a grant from the board and a reversal of the governor's reversal.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time and explaining the process to us. Jennifer Schaefer, thank you.
Thank you.
And for a deeper look at some of these issues surrounding lifers and parole, I'm joined by 3 people with different perspectives. Gary Lieberstein is district attorney for Napa County. Marvin Speed oversees parole agents for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And Carla Javits, she's CEO and president of REDF. They help find work for hard-to-employ people, including former inmates. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Marvin. There are some 80 lifers getting out of prison on average in California, 80 a month. What do they face? They get $200 and a bus ticket. Then what?
Yes, thank you, Scott. The parole department has several issues that come to fruition when a lifer is released on parole. First, we have victim and survivor issues that we need to deal with. Second, we have
What do you mean by that? They have to be notified?
Well, we have an entire victim and survivor services unit at the Department of Corrections, and there are a myriad of services that go along with that. Victims, they're going to feel like they're being re-victimized by seeing this individual back out on the street. The other factor is a lot of these individuals have committed murder within their own family. So you have a situation where they're coming out of prison and they're going back to surviving family members, some of whom may want to have contact with them, some of whom may feel re-victimized by seeing them out on the street. So we have a lot of concerns with how the victims are being treated during this process.
And they've been in prison 20, 25, 30 years. A lot has changed.
Correct. We're also concerned with public safety, obviously, and then we also have a responsibility to assist the parolee into adjusting back into life outside of prison. A lot of the problems are they've been socially isolated for such a long time that something simple, such as using an ATM or knowing how to use a cell phone or knowing how to function in general society, are lost on them.
And Gary Lieberstein, I know you've attended some of these parole hearings with families, family members, victims, and so on. What would you add to what you heard in the setup piece there about whether or not someone is ready to get out?
Well, I think every case is certainly very different, Scott, and it's, part of it is being in the moment in front of the parole board and watching the reactions of the person who's seeking parole when family members are speaking. I mean, the family members or surviving members are usually, by law, they're the last person to speak to the parole board. And it's really a gut feeling sometimes because, we heard in the earlier segment about some people are being coached in what to say. And certainly in hearing Mr. Ward, I feel listening to him that he seems to understand.
He seems authentic.
He seems authentic, but then on the other hand, when we hear Ms. Nevin, this is like yesterday for her. And that's the thing, it doesn't matter if 20 years went by, 25, 30 years have gone by. When the case is being discussed again and they're being given impact, it's like a blink in time. And so the reality is, when you're watching the inmates speak, are they just saying the words intellectually? Or are you feeling the emotion that they really do feel sincere remorse for what they did?
As the DA, does the DA generally just oppose parole automatically, or have you been to a parole hearing where you've said, I think this person is ready, and they're remorseful, they've got insight into what they did, and so on?
I mean, I've been to a lot of hearings over the years, and I would say that I try to go in some with open mind. Some I clearly believe, based on everything I've read, that they're not ready. They don't have the insight. I've gone into hearings where I've thought, it seems like he's close. And then I get in the hearing, and when you start seeing again, they're saying the words, but I'm not getting the feeling. And so I would like to tell you I've gone into a hearing and said this person's ready. I haven't been there yet, but I was in one this year where this man's extremely elderly and he wasn't ready. I think age-wise he was, but he had nowhere to go and no one to stay with.
Well, and that brings up a question for you, Carla, because to get out on parole, part of the deal, I think, is that you have to have a plan. Like, what are you going to do? Who are you going to connect with? Do you have family? Do you have a job? Do you have a place to live? Do you have a hope of getting a job? How does Red F help answer some of those questions?
I think that, obviously the most critical things you need when you get out are a place to live, reconnection with a network of people, and then most fundamentally a job. And there are actually employers, they're called social enterprises, that are in the business of creating jobs, generating revenue in order to bring people who otherwise are going to have a really tough time with your average employer kind of getting a look-see when they first get out, and actually offering them a job, and also that kind of team and community and network of support that they need in order to stay out.
And what kind of jobs are they working in, and what kind of jobs would be inappropriate? Or does it depend on the former inmate?
Yeah, it does depend on the former inmate, but I think, initially, especially for people who have been away for a long time, they're going to hit an entry-level job, frontline job. So that might be on a work crew doing basic cleanup of a park, that kind of thing.
Caltrans,
it might be
maybe.
Logistics. Caltrans is actually providing huge support for these jobs. So, you can clean litter abatement on the sides of roads. But there are others, screen printing or logistics. There are a whole variety of different kinds of jobs.
What kind of questions do you hear employers ask before they make a decision?
There's a variety of concerns that employers have, and I think some of them are going to be just that they're in business areas where they just can't hire people who have a record. But the most critical question is, can somebody demonstrate that they can work? And as everybody knows, when you've had a job, it's much easier to get a job. And I think an employer wants to see a good track record and a manager making that recommendation to them that the individual has worked, has showed up on time, knows how to work on a team, is committed. And what we found is that particularly people who are coming out when they're more mature are actually some of the most committed and effective workers that some of these employers see once they do give them a chance.
They probably don't want to go back, that's for sure.
That's right.
Marvin, you oversee parole agents in 8 different counties.
Yes, sir.
Some are probably more urban than others. What's the difference between an urban and a rural or a suburban county in terms of what parole is like?
Yeah, most of the difference is related to resources. The urban areas have a lot more resources and programming available. The country areas, and I do have Auburn all the way up to Lake Tahoe, they tend to be more spread out. There's less services available. The parolees have less opportunity to travel distances where they need to get, even if there were a program there. So it creates a little bit of a challenge in that the resources are a little bit spread out. They're not as available. And just to follow up, a lot of the lifer-specific issues we have, if the average age coming out for a lifer is 55, a lot of them have aged out of the employment market, so it's much more difficult for them to get a foot in the door.
And Gary Lieberstein, the recidivism rate, as we heard in the setup piece, is very low for lifers who get out, maybe less than 1%, which is much lower. Of course, it depends on how you count what counts as recidivism. Another felony, I think, is what that means. But does that mean rehabilitation is working?
Well, I think you have to look at who a lot of these folks are. I mean, if they're former gang members, it's one thing, but if we're talking about someone who killed their spouse or their ex-spouse or their girlfriend, most of them have no prior record, except maybe some domestic violence related to that particular victim, and they've spent all these years in prison, and they're saying, now I understand what I did, and it'll never happen again. And the skepticism, of course, is, well, yeah, unless you get in another relationship. But the reality is, generally, they are going to be the lowest in recidivism.
So you're saying these programs that we saw, that give them insight and teach them about anger management, that they're not really, that those don't work?
No, I'm not saying that, Scott. I mean, I think the program's absolutely essential. I mean, if we're going to truly have a Department of Corrections and rehabilitation, we've got to have focus on rehabilitation if we're going to have people released from prison, because there's the people in society who think, well, based on what they did, just put them in cages and treat them like animals. And the reality is, you do that, and then you open the cage, you're going to have an animal that's released. So I think the programs are absolutely essential. I'm just saying the triggers that involve, it's usually directed at one person, and they've taken care of that individual. So by nature, they're going to be, I understand the less likely to recidivate, but then the question as a society is retribution versus rehabilitation. And then you come back to the victims, and for them, he's going to have fresh air and a new life, and they never get to see their loved ones again. So it's very complicated, as you can imagine.
Marvin, to what extent do parole agents hear from other former inmates, other lifers who say, well, keep an eye on this person. I think he's going to get in trouble, or I don't think that one really should have gotten out. Does that kind of thing happen?
That is not as common as you would think. We're actually on the forefront of trying to get a national program together for lifers, where we use mentoring and peer groups to help these individuals adjust when they come out. The lifers tend to be isolated when they come out. They don't tend to mix a lot. They don't talk about other parolees. They tend to stick to themselves, and that's some of that social isolation that we were talking about before. But the parole agent should be in touch with both victims and the parolee and their support groups to find out what's going on with those individuals.
And then, Carla, just quickly, some people might hear this and think, well, there are a lot of people out of work, veterans and older folks and kids getting out of school. Why are we giving particular help to murderers?
Well, I would say on two fronts. One, taxpayers, if you put $1 in, we found from studies, you get $3.30 back. So we know that, if people go back, it's going to cost us a lot of money. And then we found in these programs reductions of 60% in return to violent crime. Obviously,
so it's kind of
that's what we want to see.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Carla Javits, Gary Lieberstein, and Marvin Speed. Twee, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. For more in-depth coverage of criminal justice in California, please go to kqednews.org. Tune in next week for State of Surveillance. KQED and the Center for Investigative Reporting examine crime-fighting technologies that raise concerns about privacy. I'm Twee Vu. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.